For 4 weeks, I installed the bookshelves my daughter had always dreamed about, while the man she was going to marry stood 6 feet away and described her inheritance like a line item in a spreadsheet. You're watching Daddy's Revenge Stories, and I'm grateful you chose to spend your time here. Before we begin, drop a comment telling me your city or your state. I read every single one. And one quick note, this story includes some dramatized details created for the purpose of exploring something real and true. Any resemblance to specific names or places is coincidental, but the lesson is real. My name is Levi Hartman. I'm 63 years old. I spent 36 years as a finished carpenter in Columbus, Ohio, crown molding, custom built-ins, hand-fitted millwork, the kind of work that takes a week to plan and 10 seconds for someone to walk past without noticing. That's the nature of the craft. You do it right, nobody sees it. You do it wrong, everyone does. I retired 18 months ago, about 3 months after we buried my wife, Constance. She'd asked me to, not directly, because Constance never asked for things directly, but in the way she had of making suggestions that sounded optional until you understood they weren't. Tom, she said one evening from her chair by the window, I don't want you going back to job sites the moment I'm gone. You need time to just be still. I'd rolled my eyes. 6 weeks after her funeral, I went back to job sites, because standing still in that house without her felt like drowning with nothing to hold on to. The second time I retired, I meant it. My daughter Meredith, 31, is a landscape architect. She got her mother's precision and my stubbornness in roughly equal measure, which means she's excellent at her work and near impossible to argue with about anything. She'd been with Ronan Pace for just over a year when the engagement happened. He was 36, worked in commercial real estate development, had the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. I met him twice before the ring. Both times he'd shaken my hand firmly and looked slightly past my left ear when he did it. I told myself it was nerves. Forrest Kimball called me on a Tuesday in early March. Forrest and I had worked side by side on residential projects for 2 decades before he moved into project management. We had the kind of friendship that doesn't require maintenance. You pick up exactly where you left off, no explanation needed. I've got a Victorian in Bexley, he said. New owners are doing a full renovation before move-in. Custom library wall, built-ins in the primary bedroom, crown work throughout. Painters done, floors are done. They need the finished carpentry. I'm retired, I said. You refinished your garage floor twice, he said. What's the client name? File, says M. Hartman, a pause. Common enough name. It was common enough. I let it sit for 1 second. M could stand for 100 things. Send me the drawings tonight, I said. I'll start Monday. The house on Drexel Avenue was a 1910 Victorian, fully gutted and rebuilt behind its original facade. Wide front porch, restored millwork on the eaves, the kind of renovation that costs twice what the house originally sold for and looks exactly right when it's finished. Walking through on Monday morning with my tool bag and plans under my arm, I felt that particular sharpness that comes back every time I step into an unfinished space. The sense of something about to become what it was always supposed to be. The study had been framed for a full wall built in along the north side, 12 feet wide, floor to ceiling, a rolling library ladder track already roughed in. I stood in front of it for a while before I said anything. Then I set my bag down and started measuring. She arrived on Wednesday. I heard heels on the restored hardwood before I saw her. A woman in her early 60s, dark wool coat, silver hair cut short and very precise. She moved through the entry hall with the purposefulness of someone assessing rather than admiring. Her eyes went to the crown work first, which told me she knew what she was looking at. You're the carpenter? She said, not unkindly, just categorically. The way you might say you're the electrician, a function, not a person. Site carpenter, I said. Levi Hartman, you're the owner? Something moved behind her eyes, a small rapid adjustment. Genevieve Pace, she said. My son is purchasing the home. I'm helping coordinate the finishing details. She walked the study for 10 minutes, asked 2 questions about the ladder track specifications, made a note on her phone and left. She did not ask how long I'd been in the trades. She did not ask about the drawings. She asked if the built-in framing could be done by Friday. I said yes. She nodded and walked out. Pace. It didn't land until Thursday evening, sitting at Constance's kitchen table, with soup I'd made on autopilot and didn't taste. Ronan. Pace. My future son-in-law. I told myself it was coincidence. Columbus isn't a small city. Pace isn't an unusual name. I told myself that right up until Friday afternoon when Genevieve came back with a man I recognized. He was taller than I'd registered from our 2 handshakes. Ronan walked through the front door with the comfortable ownership of someone who has already decided a space is his. He put his hand on the study doorframe and said, "This is going to be perfect." Then he looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture, not unkindly, just neutrally, and said to his mother, "Is he almost done with the framing?" "By end of day," Genevieve said. She did not tell him my name. He did not ask. I kept my face level the way you keep a bubble and a spirit level, through small, deliberate adjustments. I was standing in my daughter's future home. I had spent 4 days building the library she had described to me in exact detail 2 Christmases ago, sitting on our old couch with her feet pulled up underneath her, saying, "Dad, someday I want a house with a real library, floor to ceiling, one of those rolling ladders." I had been planning to build it myself as a wedding gift. I had never told her. I wanted her to walk in and understand what it meant. Now I was building it on a contractor's schedule, and neither of them knew who I was. I finished the framing. I drove home. I sat in the driveway in the dark for a long time before I went inside. The second week, I stopped counting visits and started watching behavior. Genevieve came 3 times. She was methodical in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety. It was habit. The habit of someone who documents everything, because documentation is leverage. She photographed every room in systematic overlapping frames, corner to corner. She asked me twice about structural load specifications on the expanded rear porch. I gave her the architect's contact both times. She typed into her phone instead of calling. On Thursday of that second week, she took a call in the kitchen while I was fitting crown molding in the adjacent hallway. She lowered her voice. Victorian plaster carries sound in ways people don't expect. Through walls, around corners, into rooms it has no reason to reach. "He won't be a problem," she said, not to me, to whoever was on the other end of that call. "The man barely understands what Constance set up. Meredith certainly doesn't." My hand stopped on the miter saw. I did not turn it on. The trust is the piece, yes. Once they're married, Ronan can petition as an immediate family member. The workshop property alone, 4 acres just outside Columbus, that's the father's. Levi, that's worth easily. A pause. Well, that's exactly the point. He's the kind of man who trusts people because he raised his daughter to do the same. That's what makes this straightforward. The kind of man who trusts because he raised his daughter to trust. I set the crown molding down on the sawhorse with the slow deliberateness of someone choosing not to let his hands do what they want to do. I kept my breathing even. When Genevieve came around the corner 3 minutes later, I was marking the next cut line and had been, by all appearances, doing exactly that. "The dining room crown work," she said. "Saturday?" "Saturday morning," I said. My voice came out steady and level and gave nothing away. 40 years of managing job sites through supply failures and weather disasters and contractors who didn't show and materials that arrived wrong had given me a voice that could say reasonable things while the rest of me came apart. She nodded and left. I worked until 6:30 that evening, long past any legitimate need to be there, because I couldn't think clearly in the house on Belmont Avenue, where Constance's coffee mug still sat in the cabinet exactly where she'd always kept it. In an unfinished space, with my tools around me and my hands moving, I could think. Constance had set up our revocable living trust 4 years before her diagnosis, not out of fear, but out of the same practical precision she brought to everything. The trust held the family home, the workshop property on 4 acres outside Columbus that I'd purchased in 2009, and Meredith's inherited quarter share of a small apartment building in Clintonville. Constance's family's property, passed to her years ago. After the funeral, I'd spent 6 months with our estate attorney restructuring it. I'd moved Meredith's portions into a separate, irrevocable trust, independent from anything I held, or anything a future spouse could petition without a court order and her explicit written consent. Our attorney had suggested it. Something in me, call it 3 decades of watching contractors get burned by handshake agreements, where a contract belonged, understood that a document which can be changed is a document that will be changed. I had been planning to give Meredith the full documentation at her wedding, a letter from Constance, a letter from me. The deed to a future she didn't know was already hers and already protected. The woman in that kitchen had described it like a floor plan. I called Forrest that night and told him I needed a favor that had nothing to do with carpentry. He said, "Tell me what you need." "Everything findable on Ronan Pace," I said. "Work history, finances, prior relationships, any pattern worth looking at." He was quiet for a moment, then "Give me a week." I went back Monday. I kept working. The shelving was taking shape, proportions right, reveals exactly what the drawings called for, the kind of result you can only get when you slow down and let the material tell you what it needs. Ronan came by Tuesday afternoon, alone this time, carrying coffee, moving through the space with the ease of a man who has no reason to feel watched. He stood at the study window for a while, then he took out his phone. He'd forgotten I was there, or he'd stopped registering me the way you stop registering background sound. "Yeah, it's coming together," he said. "Better than the photos." A pause. The Clintonville building is the piece I need you to look at. The ownership structure is unusual. It's in a trust that predates the engagement. But post-marriage, depending on how we file the joint return, there may be a way too. He glanced toward the back of the room. I was looking at a shelf pin. He turned back to the window, dropping his voice a full register. I'll explain when I see you. The point is, Meredith doesn't go through the trust documents. She doesn't know what she has. That's actually, he laughed, easy and low, the laugh of a man sharing something he's comfortable sharing. That's actually better for us right now. I set the shelf pin down without making a sound. I breathed through my nose for the count of 10. Then I picked up the shelf pin and went back to work. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a number in the comments right now, any number at all, just so I know you're still with me. Forrest called on a Monday morning 12 days after I'd asked him to look. I found something, he said, a woman named Ingrid. He told me about an urban planner in Hyde Park, mid-30s professional, had dated Ronan for 13 months. Her family owned a small commercial property in Cincinnati's redevelopment corridor. 4 months into managing what Ingrid called permit logistics on the family's behalf, Ronan had been added as co-administrator on the property management account. 10 weeks after that, paperwork initiating a proposed sale had appeared, bearing Ingrid's mother's signature on a document her own attorney could not confirm she'd intentionally signed. By the time the situation was untangled, the cost of the legal work had nearly matched the value of the proposed transaction. Did she pursue it? I asked. Her attorney told her the documentation was ambiguous enough that litigation would take years and cost more than the asset was worth. She settled out of it. And he moved to Columbus 8 months later, I said. Give or take, Forrest said quietly. I looked out the kitchen window. The old silver maple in the backyard had leafed out fully overnight. Constance would have made me take a photograph of it. Document everything you have, I said. Hold it until I say. I finished the built-in on a Wednesday. The rolling library ladder moved in its track exactly as it should. Smooth, balanced, perfectly weighted. I stood in the center of the room and looked at what I'd built. 36 years of work, and this shelf was as good as anything I'd ever done. I let myself feel that for exactly 1 minute. Then I packed my tools and signed off on the completion log and handed the key fob to the building coordinator. On Thursday evening, Meredith went to the house to take furniture measurements. Ronan didn't know she was coming. She let herself in and heard his voice from the study. He was on a call, the rolling ladder pushed to one side, a legal pad open on the shelf I had built. She stood in the hallway and heard him say, Meredith will sign whatever I put in front of her. She trusts me completely. A pause. Then lighter, her father's worse. The man thinks I'm grateful for the welcome. She did not go in. She walked back out through the front door, sat in her car on Drexel Avenue and called me. I answered before the second ring. Dad, she said, I need you to listen first. Just listen. I'm listening, I said. She talked for 12 minutes. When she stopped, the line was quiet for a long moment. How long have you known? She said. Her voice was steady in the way that costs you something to keep steady. Long enough to have something to show you, I said. Come to the house tomorrow. Okay, she said. Come for dinner, I said. I'll make your mother's chicken. She arrived at noon. We ate first. Constance was right about that. Food before hard things, always. And when the plates were cleared, I brought out what I'd kept in the drawer at the end of the counter. The drawer where Constance had always kept things worth protecting. Her handwriting was still on the label of the folder inside. Family Trust, our future, our daughters. I set the folder on the table. I set Forrest's printed summary beside it. I set the documentation from our estate attorney on top. Then I sat down across from my daughter and told her everything in sequence, the way I had been documenting it for 4 weeks. The first overheard call, what Ronan said to his father on the phone, Ingrid in Cincinnati, the pattern that connected all three. When I reached the section about the trust restructuring, about what I'd done in the months after her mother died, about the letter Constance had written, and I had been carrying for 18 months, Meredith reached across the table and took my hand and held it without saying anything. After a while she said, she knew, didn't she? Mom knew she was leaving me something that needed protecting. Your mother knew everything she was leaving you, I said. My voice broke once, right in the middle of leaving, just once. She made sure it would hold. Meredith opened the folder and read the letter in her mother's handwriting. She read it twice. When she put it down, her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. What do I do? She said. I looked at my daughter, 31 years old, her mother's precision, my stubbornness, and something that belonged to neither of us, a steadiness she'd built herself. That is entirely your decision, I said. Not mine. I'm telling you what is true. You decide what you do with it. The engagement dinner had been planned for 2 weeks. A restaurant in German Village, 12 guests, Ronan's parents and 2 colleagues, Meredith's 2 closest friends, and me. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a seat with a clear view of the entrance. Forrest met me at the bar. We didn't say much. Old friends who have stood beside each other through difficult things understand that sometimes presence is the whole thing. Genevieve arrived in a cream blazer, her smile warm and controlled. She saw me across the room and nodded once. I nodded back. Two people who understood each other and said nothing about it. Meredith arrived with Ronan. She was composed in a way that took real effort. I could see it in the deliberateness of how she moved, the slight extra stillness in her hands. She came straight to me and hugged me, and held on longer than she normally would. "You're here," she said. "Where else?" I said. Dinner was served. For 30 minutes, the evening was exactly what it appeared to be: conversation and wine, and the easy warmth of a celebration. Then Ronan stood and raised his glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he said. He turned to me with an expression of perfectly calibrated gratitude. "Especially Levi, Meredith's dad. I hope we're going to build something real together, as family." He lifted his glass toward me. I stood up. The table went quiet. I reached into my jacket and placed Constance's letter on the table. Her handwriting, her paper, the words she had written in the last clear months of her life for the daughter she was going to leave behind. "I want to give Meredith something tonight," I said. I looked at my daughter. This belonged to her mother. It's been waiting 18 months for the right moment. I held her gaze. "It's yours. You decide what you do with it." Meredith picked it up with steady hands. She pressed it once against her chest. Then she looked at Ronan. I don't know exactly what she saw in his face in the 3 seconds that followed. She told me later it was the eyes. She said she'd spent 14 months learning to read his expressions, and in those 3 seconds she read something she could not unread. The rapid, cold calculation running underneath the performance, the assessment of how much I knew and whether any of it could still be managed. She set the letter down on the table. "I need you to leave, Ronan," she said, quietly, completely. The room was very still. Genevieve rose from her chair. Her composure was intact, but barely. She said her son's name in a low, urgent voice. Ronan looked at me, then at Meredith. Something moved through his face that I recognized. The rapid adjustment of a man realizing the terrain has changed and there is no new position available. He found nothing. The room had nothing to offer him. He left. Genevieve followed. The door closed behind them. Forrest picked up his water glass. "I have it on good authority," he announced in the carrying voice of a man who knows exactly when a room needs air, that the chocolate lava cake here is the best in Columbus. I verified this personally, at some personal sacrifice. Laughter moved around the table, unsteady at first, then real. Meredith looked at me across the empty space where Ronan had been, and her eyes were wet and steady and completely her own. "Stay," she said. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. We stayed until the restaurant closed. We talked about her mother. We talked about what the letter said, and what it had taken to write it, and what it meant to know it had been waiting. We talked about trust. Not the thing you perform for someone else, but the thing you build quietly so it holds when the people you love need it to. Walking out into the cold March air, Meredith put her arm through mine, the way she'd done since she was small, and we stood on the brick sidewalk while the city moved around us, indifferent and lit up and full. "The library," she said after a while, "the built-in, that was you." "That was me," I said. She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder. "It's perfect, Dad." "I know," I said. "I built it to be." People sometimes ask me what I learned from all of this. I tell them the same thing every time. I learned that love without honesty is a structure without a foundation. It looks right from the outside. It holds its shape in fair weather. But the moment real weight is placed on it, grief, fear, betrayal, the ordinary weight of a life being lived honestly, it gives. I spent 36 years building things meant to last, and I nearly lost the most important thing I'd ever built, my relationship with my daughter, not because of Ronan, but because of my own silence. I kept things from her that I told myself were for her protection. I managed a situation instead of trusting the person who deserved to be trusted with it. So let me say this plainly, the way I wish I had figured out sooner. Don't wait until the cracks are visible to tell the people you love the truth. Don't confuse protecting someone with controlling what they're allowed to know. The people who love you deserve the full picture, not the version you've decided is safe for them to see. I'm 63 years old. I brew 2 cups of coffee every morning. I set the second one on the counter before I catch myself. 18 months, and that habit hasn't broken. Some habits don't break. They just remind you of what's worth holding on to. Meredith has her mother's letter in a frame in the library now. She sent me a photograph last Sunday. The rolling ladder is in the corner. The shelves are full. The light in the room is exactly what I measured for. We have Sunday calls that last an hour and cover everything. She asks for my opinion. I give it honestly. That's all I have ever known how to do. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you love, something you've been meaning to say, a call you've been putting off, drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about what a family is actually built from, share this with them. It might be exactly what they need today. Subscribe if you want to stay. There are more stories where this one came from. Thank you for being here until the very end. It means more than you know.